All right, let's go ahead and take a look at your next lesson, which is gaining number sense with percents. The focus for today is going to be trying to understand how to use mental math really with a lot of these percents and this concept of just understanding how this works with having a percent of a number. So we're going to be focusing on two sections here. The first one is going to be converting the percentage to a fraction in order to solve the percent of a number problem. And the other situation is going to be converting the percent to a decimal to find the percent of a number. So we'll look at both of those and then we'll do some estimating at the end. Okay. So up in your page sorter, let's head up to the top. Today we're going to be focusing on using number sense to determine if an answer seems reasonable. Okay, so let's go ahead and mark in learning goal 53 here, not with a highlighter. And then we had 52 there for our percents, decimal, and fraction conversion. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at today. I'll get rid of the page sorter here. You can use your fraction decimal chart as well with this, or you can do some work with the calculator as well, whatever works best for you. So when doing work with percents, like I said, we're going to be making sure that you turn them into fraction form to do work, or putting them into decimal form. Okay, so you have to convert those percents to fraction or decimal to then find the percent of a number. So we're going to start off with that fraction section. We're going to bounce around a little bit here. Before we get into tips for working with fractions, we can go ahead and plug this in. Before we get into the tips for working with fractions, I want us to just look at these 1, 2, and 3 here. So let's start off with number 1 to get this foundational concept. So obviously, if you have a test that's worth 92 points and you scored a 0%, 0% of 92 would mean that you have a score of 0. Okay. If we go to the other extreme side, 100% of an 89-point test would be 89. Okay. Now, in the middle here, we have 50%. Okay, so 50%, if we think about moving and changing our percent to a decimal, we know we divide by 100. That's what percent means, which would give us 0.5. And we know 0.5 is the fraction 1/2. And so what we're really doing is when we say 1/2 of 65, so we've changed it to a decimal, or we've changed it to a fraction, and this is how we're going to be solving and thinking things. So 0.5 of 65, or 1/2 of 65. And what you realize also that of means multiply. And so 1/2 of 65, well, you know what half of 65 is. If I write it up here, even if I write it as 65 over 1, half of 65 just means I'm doing 65 divided by 2. Because imagine I merge these together, 65 times 1, 2 times 1, and we end up with 65 divided by 2. And half of 65, we know half of 60 is 30, half of 5 is 2.5. And so we are joining our 2 there, and we end up with 32.5. Okay, so half, or 50% of 65, is 32.5, or 32.5. Okay, and so those are our 3 different scenarios. We have 0%, 100%, and 50 we know is half of. Okay, and remembering that of means multiply when we're solving problems like this. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about those tips with working with fractions. So one of the big tips to realize is that 50% of something is a nice, easy one, because we know 50% as a fraction is just 1/2. Okay, so if we were going to give the example of 50% of 65, we know that this just means 1/2 of, meaning times, 65, okay, which we know is 65 divided by 2, okay, and 65 divided by 2, we already said is the 32.5, okay. So this is a common thing to be aware of with fractions. Let's go ahead and move down to some of these fraction, or this section where we're going to convert these percents to fraction form. Okay, so 25% is another common fraction. If we move our decimal point, divide by 100, we have 0.25. And we know this as a fraction, okay, is 1/4. Okay, or 25 hundredths is 1/4. So we have 1/4 of 80. Remember, I know that of means multiply. And so I have 1/4 of 80. I'm writing it up in the numerator. Okay, and this is the same thing as 80 over 1. So we can look at this if we multiply and join those together. We have 80 divided by 4. And so when we're doing 80 divided by 4, I know that that is 20. Okay, so this is one strategy, is changing the percent to fraction form and then doing that division. So let's look at 16 2/3. We have 16 2/3. Let's go ahead and first just make this look a little bit different. So 2/3, if you look at your fraction decimal chart, and what I mean by that is this chart right here that we've built before. Okay, so if you look at the thirds, we know that 2/3 is right here, and that is 0.6 repeating. Okay, so I have 16.6 repeating. This is still percent. We haven't gotten rid of that yet. We're just rewriting this. If I move this over, okay, I have 0.16 with the 6 repeating. So let's see what fraction that is, because that's our objective for this one, is to change everything to fractions. So we're looking for 0.16 repeating, and I see that right here with 1/6. So as a fraction, this is 1/6, and we're saying 1/6 of 18, okay, or 18 over 1. 18 divided by 6, we know, is 3. And so there we go. Okay, let's go to the next one. We have 12.5%. We can do our nice decimal movement, divide by 100. It gives us 0.125 as a decimal. So what is 0.125 as a fraction? Well, let's go ahead and look at our fraction decimal chart. And I see 0.125 right there is 1/8. Okay, and so as a fraction, we have 1/8 of 48. Okay, so I'm going to write it like this, over 1. You can look at that, go ahead and join that together. We have 48 divided by 8. Okay, and so we know that 6 times 8 is 48, and so our answer is 6. So let's sort of check reasonableness here. So think about this. 1/4 of 80 is 20. That makes sense. 1/6 of 18, okay, is 3. And that makes sense. And 1/8 of 48 is 6. Okay, and those are reasonable, make sense. Let's go to our next one here. We have 62.5. We know we can just rewrite that as 62.5%. Now let's officially change that. So moving it over to 0.625. Our objective is to turn these into fractions and work with fractions for this section. So let's look for 0.625 as a fraction, and I see it right there, okay, which is 5/8. And so we have 5/8 as a fraction of 96. Okay, let's go ahead and put that over 1 as well. Okay, so we're talking 5/8 times 96. So one of the things that we can do is we can think about doing some cross multiplying here. And so, or not cross multiplying, cross simplifying here. And so I'm looking at, because obviously I could do 5 times 96, 8 times 1, and then do my division from there. Or I can look at our 8 and our 96, and we can see if we can cross simplify that first. Okay. And so let's see if we can think about 96 divided by 8. So let's see, 96 divided by 8 actually gets us 12. Okay, so I'm going to cross simplify here. Okay, divide by 8 over 8, and I get a 1 here, and I get a 12 here. Okay, so if you think about this now, basically what we did was we did 96 divided by 8, and that tells us that what 1/8 is. And so 1/8 is 12, but we actually have 5/8. So we're going to now go ahead and do 12 times 5, and we get 60. Okay, and so 5/8 of 96 is 60. Let's see if that makes sense thinking about 50%. So 50%, we know 45 and 45 is 90. So 45, 46, 47, 48 is half. Well, 62% is a little bit more than half, and 60 is a little bit more than the 48 that we said is half. So that makes sense. Okay. All right, next one. We have 55 and 5/9. So right away, I want to get rid of that 5/9 and just write 55 point whatever that is. So we have to look or try to remember what 5/9 is. So let's look at our ninths, and here we go. So 5/9 is just 0.5 repeating. Okay, and so I have this. Now this is still percent. We're just rewriting it. Let's go ahead and put it into decimal form. So we have 0.5, but we have all those 5s, and we know that the 5s are repeating, so we just have 0.5 repeating. Well, oh, look back at there. 0.5 repeating is 5/9. Okay, so the fraction form for this is 5/9. And so our question is, what is 5/9? We put it in the percent in fraction form of 35. Okay, so one of the things that we can do, again, is we can do the 35 divided by 9. Okay, that would give us what 1/9 is, and then multiply it by 5 since we actually have 5/9. So here's a couple of things, though, to think about. This, we can definitely solve this out exactly, but I want you to think about if you didn't have a calculator and things like that. Sometimes we are going to estimate what this is rather than get an exact. Okay, so one of the things I notice if I'm looking at this math problem here is if I'm going to do some cross simplifying, man, if I could divide by 9 on both the top and the bottom there, that would make this a really easy problem to figure out. So I'm actually going to estimate and change this to a 36 because it allows me to divide by 9. Okay, and because the purpose of this is for you to just do some mental math and estimate these without necessarily having to go to a calculator. Okay, and so I could divide by 9. Both of these cross simplify, and I get a 1 here, and 36 divided by 9 is 4. Okay, so now I have 1/9 is 4. So, but I have 5/9. So if we continue multiplying across, 5 times 4 equals 20. And so here we go. Now, but this is approximately 20. Okay, it's not exact because we did change and make a sort of compatible number. Okay, if we do that, let's just actually see how close that is. Okay, so we have our 5/9, which we know is going to be a repeating decimal. Let's go ahead and do our actual 35 divided by 9, and then times the 5, and let's see what we would have got. So 19.4 repeating. So our 20 is really close with that estimate. Okay. All right. Now let's go ahead and do 75. Ooh, this is a nice easy fraction, right? So we know that if we move the decimal to the left, we have 0.75. 0.75 as a fraction is 3/4. So we have 3/4 of 24. I'm going to put that over 1. I can definitely cross-simplify this. And I have a 1 here, and I have divided by 4 is 6. So 24 divided by 4 is 6. So that's how much 1/4 is, but we have 3/4, which is why we're going to continue multiplying across. 3 times 6 is 18. Okay, so 75% of 24 is 18. Let's think about what half of 24 is. We know that that's 12, so this definitely makes sense. Okay, all right, so that is how we can solve a percent of a number by converting to a fraction and using that fraction to solve. So now let's go ahead and think about how to do that just from decimal form. And so what we're going to do is focus on tips to working with decimals. Okay, and we're really going to focus, this is going to be your really good real-life application. So we're going to talk about decimals in relationship to things being 10%. Okay, and so what I want you to understand is that when we're talking about 10% as a decimal, we're talking about when you move that decimal place, we're talking about 0.1, which is 1/10, okay, or divided by 10. So if you were to do 10% of 40, okay, as an example, that means that we're doing, 0.1 or 1/10 of 40. Okay, and if we're doing 1/10 of 40, okay, we're just doing 40 divided by 10, and that would take this and move the decimal spot 1 spot. Okay, so 1/10 of 40, all that means is move the decimal spot 1 spot to the left, and we would end up with 4. So 1/10 of 40 is 4. So this is going to be a very common thing to use when working with percents of a number. Okay, so let's go ahead and focus on this section. So we have 10% of 60 is. So we know 10% is of 60 is 0.1. Okay, and so we have 0.1 is 1/10 of 60, and that means we're dividing by 10, so that would just be move the decimal 1 spot, and we end up with 6. Okay, so these ones are nice, easy ones. And basically, anytime you have 10% of something, you're just taking that decimal, because we know we're dividing by 10, and moving it 1 spot. So they're a super easy one to just look at and go, oh, 10% of 60, move the decimal 1 spot, and we have 6. Okay, so let's look at something like this, though. We're going to use the same idea. Okay, what I want you to think is, how many 10% are there in 30%? And so if you said 3, you would be correct. Okay, so all I have to do, though, is think about this in terms of 10%. Okay, so what is 10% of 82? Well, all we're doing is moving the decimal spot 1 spot to the left, because we know 10% is 0.1 or 1/10, which is divided by 10. So 10% is 8.2, and I just need to know what 30% is. So that's the 8.2 plus 8.2 plus 8.2, or times 3. Okay, so instead of my dot, I'm using this asterisk, which is a common thing with showing the multiplication. So 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 8 is 24, I have one decimal movement, and so we have 24.6. So this is a great way to do mental math when you're dealing with percents that are multiples of 10. So now I have 90%. So again, let's focus on what 10% of 23 is. We know that that's just meaning 1/10, okay, which is dividing by 10, moving the decimal. And so 10% of 23 is 2.3. Okay. We have 90 of those. So you have a couple ways of doing this, right? Because 100% of 23 is 23. So 90% would be 2.3 off of that. So we could do 23 minus 2.3, or since we know 10%, we could also multiply by 9 of them to get the 90%. 3 times 9 is the 27, 2 times 9 is the 18, plus the 2 is 20 with the one decimal movement, and you have 20.7, which also would have been the same as 23 minus the 2.3, okay, if you did it that way as well. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we have 105% of 80. So this section we're getting into 5%. And so all you have to do with this is another great mental math strategy, is if you know what 10% is, then obviously you can figure out 5% because it's just half. Okay. So let's look at it in terms of the one up here. So if we look at number 10 as an example, we already know that 10% of 60 is 6, okay? So obviously 5% is half of that, okay? So if we have 10% equals 6, think about just dividing by 2, that means 5% would equal 3, okay? And so this is a nice, easy mental math concept for us to think about. So let's break this apart. So we have 100% and we have 5%. Okay, we know 100% of 80 is 80. And let's think about what 10% of 80 is. So 10% of 80 is moving the decimal spot 1. So 10% equals 8. So divide by 2, that means 5% equals 4, okay? And so we just join those together, and so we have 80 plus 4 equals 84. So nice mental math opportunity. So let's take a look at this. Break this apart and decompose it. We have 10% and 5%. I know 10% just means 1/10 as a fraction, or move the decimal place one spot. So 10% of 320 is 32. And if 10% is 32, well, 10% equals 32, divide by 2, we have 5% equals, let's think. So 15 plus 15 is 30, but I have to account for that extra 2, so we have 16, okay? And so we just add the 10% of 320 and the 5% and join them together, and you have 32 plus 16, and you end up with 48. Okay. All right. Next one, we have 85%. Okay. So you have to take care of the 80% and the 5%. And we know that 80% is just 10% 8 times, and then we can figure out what half of 10% is to cover that extra 5. So let's go ahead and figure this out. So we know 80%, okay? Let's find out what our 10% is first, okay? So 1/10 of 48, okay? What does that equal? That's just 48 divided by 10, or moving the decimal point. So 10% is 4.8, okay? But we have 8 of those, okay? So we need to do 4.8 times 8 So we have 64. 4 times 8 is 32. So we have 30 plus 6 is 38. Okay. So our 80% here, let me move these out of the way a little bit. That really moved out of the way, didn't it? Our 80% is 384. Does that look right? I don't think so. Take our decimal. We have 1 decimal movement overall. So we have 38.4 is 80%. Now focus on what our 10% was. Our 10% equaled that 4.8. So divide by 2, and we have 2.4 for the 5%. Add those up together, okay? And we have our 38, 39, 40.8. Okay? And so that's your process of doing that and using that 10% to help you solve all the other nice numbers with anything related to 10% or multiples of 10, and also figuring out that 5% as well. So this bottom section, what we're going to do is estimate the percent of each fraction. Okay, so we're given a fraction and we need to change to a percent. So we have a couple ways of doing this. The biggest focus is we're going to be changing things to what are called compatible numbers. Okay, and it's different than rounding because you're actually just making numbers that are as close as possible that work really well together. Okay, and so when I look at something like this, this one I notice is really close to 25. So I'm going to change this and say we are, let's go to 23 over 25. And here's why I'm doing this, because I know I can easily change that 25 to hundredths. And if I can change it to hundredths, then that's a percent, okay? Because percents are out of 100. And so to make 100, I'm going to multiply by 4 over 4. And I know that we have 100 on the bottom, and then 23 times 4. We have, let's see, 20 times 4 is 80. And then 3 times 4 is 12. So 80 plus 12 is 92. And I know that the fraction 92 hundredths is 92%. Okay. And so let's go ahead and just see how close we were to this. So we'll do the actual 23 divided by 26. And you can see we get 0.88. So that would have, if we multiply by 100, been 88%. Okay, and so 92 is pretty close estimation. Okay, done without a calculator too. So let's go ahead and look at this one. We have 63 divided by 78. So I want to come up with some compatible numbers. Okay, so approximately this is, let's see, so 60 is pretty close and 80 is pretty close. And that's something easily I can simplify in my head since they're multiples of 10s. And we get 6/8, which also, if we divide by 2 over 2, we get 3/4. Okay, and oh, I know 3/4 as a decimal. That's 0.75. And so we move it 2 spots to the right or multiply by 100, and we have 75%. Okay, so let's see how close we were. 63 divided by 78 is 0.80. Move it to the right 2 spots, and we're at 80%. So we really were pretty close with our estimate, and that's all those are. All right, 11 and 32. I think I can turn that 32 into something that'll work with 11. Okay, so let's go ahead and change these to these compatible numbers. And I can easily divide by 11 over 11, and I get 1/3. Okay, now I know the fraction 1/3 as a decimal is 0.3 repeating. Okay, and so if I move the decimal to the right 2 spots, 1, 2, I have 33. I need to represent that repeating still though. 0.3 repeating, so 33.3 repeating percent. okay, by multiplying by 100. Or we know we could write 33 1/3%, okay, as our final answer for that one. Okay, and so that is how you can use compatible numbers to estimate what percent a particular fraction is, or score on a test or something like that. Okay. All right, there you go. So really focus on those strategies. I'm hoping that that helped you just understand some number sense behind how you can calculate the percent of a number.